Well, when I was a little boy sitting on my mama's knee.
Hello, my name is Marcie Sclove. Welcome back to Going Deeper. My guest right now is Aaron Lansky, a recipient of the Sammy Award for significant contribution to the Amherst literary culture. In 1980, Aaron founded the Yiddish Book Center, a nonprofit organization that works to tell, quote, the whole Jewish story by rescuing, translating, and disseminating Yiddish books and presenting educational programs that broaden understanding of modern Jewish identity. I loved all that, and I couldn't find a way to shorten it, so I didn't try. For his work, Aaron received a Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation in 1989, and he's also the author of a best-selling book called Outwitting History: The Amazing Adventures of a Man Who Rescued a Million Yiddish Books. So, welcome.
Thanks, Marcie. Great to be here.
So happy to have you.
Good.
Yeah. I know this might be crazy, but I had a sense that some of our viewers might not even know what Yiddish is.
Oh, that's not crazy in the least, and
Really?
I'm very happy to explain.
Okay, so that's where I want to start. What is Yiddish?
Well, Yiddish is the language that was spoken by, something like 3/4 of the world's Jews for the past 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So there are actually 18 Jewish languages in all. Most people know Hebrew, of course.
Sure.
Some people might have heard of Aramaic, which was the language that Jesus spoke, in the language of the Talmud. Some may know Ladino or Judesmo, Judeo-Spanish. But there are actually a whole range of Jewish languages, all of which developed sort of in the same way, that Jews sort of picked up the vernacular around them, but spoke it in such a distinctly Jewish way, or imbued it with a Hebrew alphabet and a large body of Hebrew and Aramaic vocabulary, and created something decidedly Jewish out of it. And Yiddish, whose name means Jewish, is sort of the epitome of all of that.
Okay.
And so it is a very lively, very rich, and very evocative tongue.
Wow. It's reminding me a little bit of the different kinds of Creole that are, come from different...
Yeah, actually, the great Yiddish linguist Max Weinreich once said, a language is a dialect with an army. And so, all these things are languages, of course, but it's only those that get countries that get to be recognized as full-size.
Interesting.
But as late as well into the 19th century, even the early writers of Yiddish, the first modern Yiddish writers, didn't refer to the language as Yiddish. Back in those days, they called it, its kind of homegrown name was Mamaloshin, which meant mother's tongue, as opposed to Hebrew, a language of scholarship and prayer and kind of a man's sphere. But the public name for it was jargon, which meant jargon, because they saw it as kind of an amalgam of different linguistic stock.
Oh, wow. All right. So now we know what Yiddish is and how it was important in a certain way. Can you tell us the story of finding, of your whole search, the beginning of the Yiddish Book Center?
Of course I can, but I think I better back up a tiny bit and tell you the story of how we went from having a language that was spoken for 1,000 years to having a modern literature, because that's sort of the key. That's the missing link here, right?
Okay, sure.
So for 1,000 years, Yiddish was, it was the language of everyday life. It was the language of the home. It was the language of the marketplace. But it wasn't real, and there was a little bit of writing. Well, there was a little writing took place in Yiddish. It was called Vibratite, or translation for the benefit of women who weren't expected to know Hebrew, the scholarly language. Hebrew was more like Latin in that context.
Okay.
But it was limited. And certainly there were men who read it, by the way, who weren't particularly well educated and certainly enjoyed this. But it was limited. And it wasn't until well into the 19th century when the old Jewish world began to unravel, when modernity and modern ideas, Enlightenment, finally made their way into Eastern Europe, and Jews were very quick to embrace this and try to figure out, a whole new experience of how do you live as Jews in a modern world, that they gradually turned to Yiddish, to this vernacular, only for utilitarian reasons. It was a way to reach the masses in their own language. And, what do they say? The medium's the message, right? They quickly got turned on to its artistic possibilities, and before you knew what happened, I don't know, 40,000 titles have been printed, plus 3,000 separate Yiddish journals, newspapers, magazines. So it was just a vast outpouring of literary creativity, all within the space of about 2 generations.
Wow.
And probably would be flourishing even now were it not for the obvious historical disruptions.
Sure.
In 1939, there were 11 million Yiddish speakers in the world. By 1945, 1 in 2 had been murdered in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Many writers and intellectuals took refuge in the Soviet Union, where there was increasing persecution. And finally, on August 12, 1952, which is not very long ago, for us anyways, on a single night, Stalin ordered the execution of all of the country's major Yiddish writers.
Yeah.
And Israel, of course, was predicated on a negation of the diaspora. They were going to create something new and leave the past behind. And America guaranteed religious freedom, but not much truck for differences of culture and language. And so Yiddish, at the best, was sort of swept under the rug or hidden from the kids, and is how most of us, grew up.
Sure. That's a great explanation. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay.
So
now there's
why did I go collect all these books? Well, yeah, so why are all the books lying around out there? I mean, all these books were published, and really, most Jewish homes in America, about something like well over 90% of American Jews were from so-called Ashkenazic families, or Central East and East European Jewish families.
Sure.
And Yiddish was spoken in many of those households, and many of them had large collections of Yiddish books.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have this historical disruption, this rift takes place, and the kids want to make it in America, and they learn English, and they quickly leave Yiddish behind. So that by the time I came along, I grew up hearing Yiddish spoken as the Einiglich soll nicht verstehen, when the grandchildren weren't supposed to understand. And eventually I went off to Hampshire College, though, in 1973.
Yeah.
And I started studying a course on the Nazi Holocaust, organized by Hampshire students, taught by visiting lecturers. And I was extremely fortunate in that the faculty advisor for that course was a man named Leonard Glick, who was a physician and an anthropologist.
Yeah.
Because he was an anthropologist, when I went to him at the end of the semester and said, I'm not so interested in the Holocaust as such, how the Nazis went about the systematic murder of the Jews of Europe. I'm way more interested in who were these Jews and what was it about them that was so antithetical to fascist ideology in the first place. And because I went to an anthropologist, he naturally took what today we would call a social historical or cultural historical approach, and said, well, let's look at it. Who were these people? Where were they living? How did they live their lives? How did they make a living? What were the relationships between men and women? And on and on and on. So he sort of, Len sort of presupposed or anticipated an historiographical revolution that wouldn't play out more widely for another 25 years, which was a shift from sort of intellectual and religious history to social and cultural history. But that was my education. Eventually I went off to graduate school in Montreal at McGill, and I thought I was going to go on to a reasonably conventional, well, maybe that's not quite true. I thought I was going to go on to an academic career, except that there were no books to read. So each week our teacher would assign a novel for the next week's class. And Montreal was different from here. Yeah. Because Montreal is a multilingual, or a bilingual community. Yeah. And when the Jews got there, neither the French nor the English really wanted them. And so the Jews were able to maintain their own schools and do so to this day. There really are no public schools in Montreal. There are government-supported denominational schools. So there's a French Catholic school board, a Protestant English school board, and then there are 3 different Jewish school boards because the Jews were arguing with each other. But several of these were teaching quadrilingually.
Wow.
This is even in the 1970s. They were teaching in French, English, Hebrew, and Yiddish. So it was quite a different thing. And so in Montreal, we used to go around to the old Jewish neighborhoods and we'd knock on doors and we'd say, excuse me, I need to borrow this book from my class. And people were enormously forthcoming. I mean, they bring you in and they serve you tea in a glass. And they open the cakes and then you have to give them the whole review of the book when you bring it back. Right. But I thought, well, you could pull this off in Montreal, but what in the world is happening in, I don't know, Champaign-Urbana or Berkeley or Austin or other places, or Amherst or other places where Yiddish was being taught by that point. Yeah. So it was becoming apparent that as an older generation was passing on, that was just happening then, that the grandparents were dying. And as they passed on, more often than not, they would leave books behind, large libraries behind. And the kids didn't know the language. The grandkids literally didn't know what these books were or why they mattered. And more often than not, the books would end up, well, in the best of cases, stashed away in an attic or a basement, and the worst of cases, thrown in the trash.
Yeah.
So I took what I thought, well, I went down to New York, met with scholars who thought there were 70,000 volumes still extant and recoverable. How they could have been so wrong, Marcie, God only knows, because it was like crazy. We're talking orders of magnitude here, you know.
Yeah.
But I came back to Amherst, where I'd gone to school, and started this new organization called the Yiddish Book Center.
Yeah.
And sat down, this is pre, ubiquitous computer anyways,
Right,
and sat
right.
down on an old government surplus IBM typewriter and banged out press releases and sent them out all over the country, that for the first time in 50 years, significant numbers of young people are interested in Yiddish. Again, if you have books, please send them on in.
Wow.
And before I knew it, it was like a deluge had been unleashed,
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, at one point we had to call up Congressman Conti's office and have them arrange for the post office in Northampton to get a bigger truck because they couldn't haul. I mean, it was so out of hand. This is like, we like to say now, we say the staff of the post office in Amherst knows more about the extent of Yiddish literature than most Jews in America because they've slept so many books over the years. But for a period of almost 35 years, this is what we did. We were collecting books. We ended up collecting probably about 1.5 million volumes. We're not exactly sure.
Yeah.
And so it really was, a great adventure, and the book that I wrote 12 years ago was about that.
Also, we want to put a link to this amazing video from about 15 years ago, I think, from the Yiddish Book Center.
Oh, I love that video.
A lovely video.
Forever young. I love the video. Yeah, yeah, that was done by
That's
Sam
true.
Ball, who's a filmmaker in San Francisco, but who comes from Northampton.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And he really captures, and you capture, but all the photos of the people.
Yes.
You going
yes.
to their homes and hearing their stories, and then them opening each book and telling you something from each book. It's
Marcie, that
beautiful.
that was the great gift of my life, was being in the right place at the right time and meeting all those people when I did. They used to say to me, they'd say, junger Mann, which means young man, was sort of my generic name in that word. They'd say, junger Mann, das ist unser Yerusha, this is our inheritance. This is the most valuable thing we own, and then they'd hand you these books one volume at a time.
Moving.
It was. I have to tell you honestly, though, I always felt sort of inadequate to it because, as much as I could try to understand it, and as much as I really, really genuinely enjoyed talking with them, I was aware of the fact that I couldn't take it all in. It was just too much. It was a civilization that they were trying to impart in the course of a 20-minute glass of tea,
Right, but also it was so important to them to impart it. There was somebody there who wanted to receive it. You probably got sort of fire hosed with, more than you could handle as a young man. For sure.
But it was
because it was loaded for them. It's their whole life. It's their mortality. There's a lot in there. It is,
and it was a civilization more passionate and more freighted with history than anything that you or I could ever imagine today.
And the pain
they
of
lived,
the Holocaust,
they lived through the great events of the 20th, or the great and the horrible events of the 20th century. But history was a very real thing for them. It was just the fabric of their lives in every way.
Right. I love what you say about being in the right place at the right time. Polly Longsworth, who is part of this same show, was in the right place at the right time to be exposed to all this Emily Dickinson information. And it's kind of cool that the two of you are the recipients
Well,
this
Polly
year.
and her husband Chuck have been supporters of the Yiddish Book Center for a great many years, and I'm very grateful and admiring of both of them.
So, okay, then you get all the books.
Yes.
You have the building, a place to put them. You've even done some work protecting them and digitalizing them. I won't say that word twice. And then you shifted your focus.
We have. I'll just speak very briefly to what we did with the digitization.
Oh, sure. That's interesting.
That came about 15 years ago. We had all these books, but many of them were falling apart. They were printed on cheap paper. The Yiddish literature is mostly late 19th and 20th century, which means it's 100% acidic literature, meaning it's printed on pulp paper, wood pulp paper. So it crumbles over time. And I used to lie in bed, and my wife, Gail, would be there. She said, what are you doing? And the crumbs of the books are falling on the sheets, as I'm trying to read them.
Not cracker crumbs.
No, book crumbs, definitely book crumbs. and we realized that that was one problem. The other problem was we just didn't have enough, even having collected 1 million and some odd books, we didn't have enough copies of many titles to go around. So there weren't enough copies for all the libraries that wanted them. So one of the wonderful young people on our staff came to me and said, I think it's time to digitize these books. And this is about maybe 1997, I believe.
Wow.
And I'm not embarrassed to say that I didn't know what the word digitization meant in 19, and very few other people did either.
Yeah.
And eventually we ended up working with a company, a spin-off of Kodak called Danka. They set up a factory in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. For 4 years, they worked 3 shifts a day, taking books apart and scanning them one page at a time. And we thought that was it. That was a preservation project. Then 6 years ago, the internet got fast enough you could put everything online. First, we were going to work with Google. And then Jay Schaefer, the head of the library at the university, came to see me. And very politely but firmly, as is his way, said to me, I think Google's not the way to do this. It might be a great might be a great company, but the idea of one private corporation controlling all of human knowledge and having all the books in the world is probably not a great social good.
Scary.
And there was a better way to do it, which is something called the Internet Archive, which is a nonprofit group based in San Francisco. So we went out to San Francisco and met Brewster Kahle, the head of this, and it was a match from first sight, and we just understood this was the place to go. And he persuaded a senior Oracle programmer to put in 2,000 hours of work pro bono to reprogram the Internet Archive to go from right to left instead of left to right to accommodate the alphabet. And all sorts of people pitched in on this. So we put the books online. 6 years ago, we put 13,000 titles online. And we didn't really know what to expect. Who's going to read these books? It was unclear. So as of, I didn't look most recently, but at this point, we're probably about 1.7 million downloads, meaning that full-length books have been downloaded off of our website, yiddishbookcenter.org, about 1.7 million times. Well, this again, if it had been 1/10 that number, I'd still be like making a big deal about this. This is wild. And then we think that about half of the books are being downloaded primarily by younger people, literally all over the world, who are learning Yiddish and using it to access both the literature and 1,000 years of Jewish history. And the other half, more surprisingly, are probably being downloaded by Hasidic Jews, what they call Haredi Jews or ultra-Orthodox Jews, who aren't supposed to be reading this literature because it's by definition modern and secular. And that's not exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But we now know the last few years there's been a whole new body of literature of people who have left the Hasidic world. And what they reveal is that the Hasidic families are so large now, 15, 18 kids. Many of them have to access the social welfare system, and they need computers to do that. So computers have made their way into the Hasidic homes. And what 200 years of enlightenment couldn't accomplish, 6 years of having computers in the house is making happen now. So they're going online and discovering this modern secular literature written in a language that they still speak. So, what changes that will make over time, who knows?
Absolutely.
But, I was in the Soviet Union when the Berlin Wall fell. And nobody mentioned it. The whole time we're in the Soviet Union, it was a complete embargo of the news. We get up on the plane to leave. It was an SAS plane, and we fly out. And as soon as we left Soviet airspace, the pilot gets on. He said, "I want you to know, while you were in the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall fell," and everybody claps. And you realize history changes very quickly. It percolates for a very long time, but when the change comes, it happens very, very fast. And I think we're at a moment like that now. It's not that Yiddish will be revived as a spoken language among modern and secular Jews. There's no illusion about that. But what I think will happen is that the definition of Jewish life will become much broader once again. If for a long time Jews in America had been sort of reductivist, we took this great big sprawling civilization and we redefined it in American or in Christian terms as a religion divorced from culture. And now our kids, oh, come on. I mean, they don't have to make believe anymore. They don't have, if you tell them it's only a religion, they would find that risible. I mean, come on, we're people like any other with our own music and our own food and our own languages and our own books and our own history. And I think for younger people, it's almost axiomatic that that one wants to tell that whole story, as you mentioned at the very beginning.
There's something else I think that was missing. That bringing all of this culture back in replaces, which is sort of the soulfulness. the spirituality, all of the, you know, the kind of the humor, the soulfulness, the culture,
the kind of sensibility of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no,
I
there's no
think that's
question.
what all Jews have been hungry for. Not all, but you know, a lot of Jews have been hungry for that.
It's a culture that was born of marginality.
Yeah.
You know, we were on the outside for a very, very long time.
Sure.
And when you're on the outside, you develop a rather heightened sense not only of kind of demanding social justice, because it's the key to your own survival, but of also doing right by the world as well.
Right.
So, and I agree with you. I think there's a thirst out there.
Yeah,
right now.
but I'm thinking especially post-Holocaust.
Sure,
There's
of
that
course,
thirst.
of course.
Yeah.
But it wasn't immediately true. It took time.
Oh, sure.
It's a new generation that's really doing this.
Yeah.
Which brings me to where the book center's at today, which is that we are awash in young people. You know, I hate to tell you this, but I'm now the oldest person in the place. So the younger man days, you know, the young man days are long past.
Yeah, although you look exactly the same.
Oh, you're nice.
That.
You're nice. But the people I work with are not only young, but they're incredibly energetic and idealistic and rigorous in their scholarship and really serious about what they're about, but also, you know, they're not sticks in the mud either. I mean, they're fun and they're energized, and it's I don't know, I've been doing this now for 36 years. It'll be 36 years in another few weeks. And after 36 years, I'd say I get up earlier in the morning now. I go to work with more energy now. It's more exciting to me now than it's ever been, mainly because I get to work with these young people and to watch as literally before my eyes, they're kind of discovering a civilization that had been hidden for a long time. So it's very exciting.
Okay, so tell us some of the, you know, the projects that you have going.
Well, part of the work is now that we're making the books accessible, and I said we just debuted this wonderful new website that vastly increases access to the literature, and we're now also partnering with other libraries around the world to make the whole thing accessible. So this is great, you know. Another project is translation. Something like 2% of Yiddish books have been translated into English. And a lot of the best literature has yet to be translated.
Wow.
So for 10 years, we ran a program at Yale University Press to publish translations, but we were doing a book a year. And I thought that was pretty darn good till one of the young people sat down with me one day and he said, "You realize that at a book a year, you got 39,000 years to go, right?" So it was at that point I said,
it was a math problem.
So I said, "So how would you do it?" "Well, how do young people do it?" And he said, "We got to wiki it." You know, wikiing was overstating it. But what he meant by that was you have to open it up and train young people to do this work, to translate. You can't have 5 people in their 80s doing this. So we started, we got help from Steven Spielberg, and we started a whole new program in which we're now training younger translators, 20s, 30s, who know Yiddish well enough. We teach them the art of literary translation, and they are now opening up a literature that's nobody's really seen before. So there are great things happening.
Volunteer? They do it voluntarily?
We give them a modest stipend for the first year, but more importantly, we give them a mentor who teaches them the skills on a one-on-one basis.
And then they can use that professionally later on.
But the other part of what we're doing is just plainly educational, and that's the most exciting part of all. So we now run a program called Great Jewish Books for High School Students, where these preposterously brilliant young people come to us, rising juniors and seniors, and they read modern Jewish literature in English from Yiddish, Hebrew, Russian, German, Kafka, Isaac Babel, Saul Bellow, Philip Roth, Grace Paley, Anzi Yazierski. I mean, there's a whole range of writers that they've never really encountered before, either in public school or in Jewish schools. And they come there and they are like wide-eyed, and it's a revelation for them. Then, when they get to college, they can then enroll in our annual Steiner Yiddish summer program, where they can come for 7 weeks and learn the Yiddish language intensively, along with the immersion in Yiddish culture. Then we have fellowships for kids after they get, as my wife says, they're not kids, they're the people in their 20s who come after college and take responsibility for major projects. This is not like Xeroxing in a congressperson's office. They really get to do a lot. And then we started a new program called TENT, which is Encounters with Jewish Culture, where we reach young people all over North America. And they explore aspects of contemporary culture from a Jewish point of view. Comedy, film, theater, creative writing. And the people who come are brilliant and amazing and incredibly talented. And we meet them where their passions already lie, but they're not always aware of the Jewish antecedents and connections programs there.
Wow.
And it has been transformative, and like 90% of them are still involved with us in some way, and 30% have changed career as a result of a one-week program.
Oh my gosh.
So the moral of all of this is, it's a very powerful culture.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's always spoken loudly, but finally there are young people around who are listening very carefully.
That's
and
beautiful.
I think we don't know where it will go yet.
Yeah, yeah. That's really beautiful. There's another aspect that I saw a little bit on your website of these little videos of oral history.
Oh yeah, the little videos you're seeing on the website
Yeah,
are
like
excerpts.
2 or 3 minute things.
Right, but they're actually, those are just standing in for hour-and-a-half interviews.
Oh, okay, okay.
We had a young woman named Krista Whitney, who was a student at Smith College some years ago. Took a course in Yiddish literature with Justin Cammey, and then came to the Book Center as a summer student in our Steiner program,
Yeah.
learned Yiddish, went off to Vilna, to Vilnius in Lithuania, learned Yiddish even better, came back to us as a fellow, took on a student project to start recording oral histories. I was a tiny bit skeptical, but if I've learned anything in 36 years, it's just get really brilliant young people and then leave them alone and see what they can do, because it's amazing what happens.
That's
so
so
Krista
great.
organized this whole program. She's now recorded about, it's called the Wexler Oral History Program. She's recorded about 600 hour-and-a-half interviews on high-definition video with absolutely fascinating people all over the world. In fact, when Leonard Nimoy died a year ago, Nimoy had begun his career. This is Mr. Spock.
I know
didn't
him.
have to tell you that, right? he had begun his career. He came into Yiddish from a Yiddish-speaking home in Boston and begun his career on the Yiddish stage, in fact.
Wow.
And when Krista went out to interview him, he had worked with us over the years, and Krista interviewed him. He recited Hamlet's whole soliloquy in perfect Yiddish.
Oh,
Anyways,
wow.
when Nimoy died, my younger daughter calls up from New York. She says, "Daddy, you know, Leonard Nimoy died." So I go on the Times website to see what's happening. First thing I see is Krista's interview with Nimoy's embedded in the Times story,
wow.
because they Google like everybody else does,
Sure.
right?
That's
Anyways, by the end of the
fantastic.
day, the story wasn't that Spock had died. The story was that Spock had spoken Yiddish. The website had 700,000 hits that day and made it to the ABC Nightly News, and I think it's gone on to have about 25 million views since then. So,
That's
yeah.
25 million. Oh my gosh.
We live in a whole new
It's a
world.
crazy
You know,
world.
you can go direct now is the nice
Yeah.
thing, and if something has
Yeah.
enough merit and enough power, it gets to speak
Wow.
loudly.
That's amazing. Okay. Boy, I'm just full. Getting back to the Sammys, last year they were at your beautiful
Yes.
place, and that was just such a lovely event. This year they're at the Mead Museum. I'll be there, and it's just great that you have this opportunity to be honored locally for all this work that you're doing.
Well, I love that, and I have
Yeah.
to say, you know, many years ago, one of the Yiddish newspapers ran a Yiddish headline, and it said, "Amherst, neue Punkt auf der Mappe von Yiddish." Amherst, newest location on the Yiddish map, you know. So here we are, and we are very proud to be here. We made the right choice in locating here.
That is fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This
Thank you,
has
Marcie.
really been fun. I've learned a lot, too.
Great, and I'll see you soon.
See you at the
Good.
Sammys. I'd also like to thank Amherst Media and the wonderful staff and interns who helped make this show happen. Please don't forget to donate money to the Amherst Media to keep all the programming alive. And we'll see you at the Sammys, and we'll see you next time on Going Deeper. Thank you.